The most dangerous person in a crisis is usually the one nobody notices. At 6:47 p.m. on a cold Thursday evening, St. Matthew Regional Hospital looked completely normal. Families sat in waiting rooms scrolling through their phones. Nurses exchanged shift reports. Doctors reviewed charts under bright fluorescent lights. Nothing suggested that within minutes the entire emergency department would be pushed to its limits. Rachel Whitmore stood quietly near the supply station, checking trauma kits one final time before the evening rush. She had transferred to the hospital only 3 weeks earlier, and most people still saw her as the quiet new nurse who kept to herself. She rarely joined conversations. She never talked about her past. She arrived 30 minutes early every shift and left only after every task was complete. To some coworkers, that made her look overly cautious. To others, it made her seem invisible. "You know," one resident physician joked while signing paperwork, "I've never seen anyone organize gauze like it's a military inspection." A few staff members laughed. Rachel simply smiled and continued checking expiration dates. She never argued. She never explained herself. The charge nurse glanced at the clock and shook her head. "Rachel, you worry too much. This isn't a battlefield." Rachel paused for half a second before closing the supply cabinet. "No," she said softly. "It isn't." Before anyone could respond, the emergency radio crackled overhead. The dispatcher's voice sounded unusually tense. "Mass casualty incident. Multiple vehicle collision on Interstate 85. 12 patients inbound. Estimated arrival, 4 minutes." The entire department froze. Then everything moved at once. Phones rang. Stretchers rolled into position. Medical teams rushed toward trauma bays. Doctors began assigning responsibilities. The calm atmosphere disappeared instantly. The charge nurse started directing personnel. "Trauma teams 1 through 4, move now. Respiratory support to the East Wing. Residents with attending physicians." Then her eyes landed on Rachel. "Whitmore, stay near intake. Handle documentation and patient tracking." Rachel nodded without complaint. "Understood." The chief physician, Dr. Daniel Mercer, entered the department moments later. Tall, respected, and known for maintaining control under pressure, Mercer quickly assessed the room. His gaze stopped on Rachel. "You're still the new nurse, correct?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then stay out of trauma decisions. Observe and assist only." "Yes, sir." The first ambulance arrived before the conversation ended. Paramedics pushed a stretcher through the doors while another ambulance backed into the loading area behind it. Then another. Then another. Suddenly every trauma bay was occupied. Voices overlapped. Equipment alarms chimed. Staff moved from patient to patient with increasing urgency. Rachel remained exactly where she had been assigned. Calm. Focused. Watching. Listening. Noticing. While others focused on obvious injuries, her eyes drifted across breathing patterns, skin color, hand movements, tiny details most people ignored when pressure mounted. Then she saw something. One patient appeared stable. He was conscious, answering questions, and even attempting a weak smile. Most people would have moved on. Rachel didn't. Something about him felt wrong. She stepped closer, studying him for only a moment. And in that instant, she realized the next few minutes were about to change everything. The patient was alert, speaking clearly, and answering every question the paramedics asked. On paper, he looked stable. Most of the staff had already shifted their attention toward more obvious cases. Rachel had almost done the same. Almost. Then she noticed his fingertips. They were slightly pale compared to the rest of his hand. His breathing was steady, but just a little too controlled, as if his body was working harder than it appeared. His pulse was present, but there was a subtle delay between the monitor reading and what she felt at his wrist. Tiny details. Easy to miss. Rachel stepped closer and reviewed the incoming report again. Everything seemed normal. Yet the feeling remained. Something was wrong. "Doctor," she called calmly to a resident nearby. "Can you take another look at Bay 3? The young physician barely glanced up. "Vitals are acceptable. We have more critical patients." Rachel looked back at the patient. The man smiled weakly. "Am I going to be okay?" he asked. "We are going to take good care of you," Rachel answered. She did not say anything else. She simply reached for another blood pressure reading. The numbers had changed. Not dramatically. Not enough to trigger alarms. But enough for her. She immediately started preparing additional fluids. The resident noticed and frowned. "Who ordered that?" Rachel continued working. "Nobody." "Then stop." Several nearby staff members turned toward them. "His condition is changing," Rachel said quietly. "We should prepare now." The resident shook his head. "You are making assumptions." Rachel met his eyes for the first time. "I hope I am." For a moment neither moved. Then a monitor sounded behind them. Another patient needed attention. The resident walked away, clearly annoyed. Rachel remained beside the stretcher. Less than 2 minutes later, the patient suddenly became disoriented. His skin color changed. The room shifted instantly from routine observation to urgent intervention. Nurses rushed over. The same resident returned, now moving much faster than before. Rachel was already there. Equipment was ready. Additional support had already been requested. Precious time had not been lost. Dr. Daniel Mercer arrived moments later. His eyes moved from the patient to the equipment Rachel had prepared. Then to Rachel herself. "How did you know?" he asked. Rachel adjusted an intravenous line. "I did not know." Mercer frowned. "Then why prepare?" Rachel looked at the patient. "Because if I was right, seconds mattered." The chief physician said nothing. Around them, the emergency department grew even busier. More ambulances continued arriving. Every trauma bay was now occupied. The waiting area overflowed. The charge nurse struggled to keep up with assignments. Yet while everyone else focused on the loudest emergencies, Rachel continued noticing things others missed. A teenager whose pupils reacted unevenly. An elderly woman whose breathing pattern changed every few minutes. A businessman whose hand trembled despite normal readings. One by one, Rachel quietly brought concerns to the physicians. One by one, those concerns proved correct. Staff members began exchanging looks. Nobody said it out loud yet. But the same question was forming in every mind. How was the quiet new nurse seeing things that experienced professionals were missing? And Rachel herself seemed completely unaware that people were beginning to watch her differently. She simply moved from patient to patient with the same calm focus she had shown since the moment the first ambulance arrived. As if this level of pressure was not unusual at all. The clock above the nurse's station showed 7:31 p.m. Nearly 40 minutes had passed since the first ambulance arrived, yet the pressure inside the emergency department continued building. Every available room was occupied. Every hallway seemed crowded with equipment, staff, and urgent decisions. Still, Rachel Whitmore moved through the chaos with the same steady pace. She never rushed. She never raised her voice. Somehow that made everyone around her move faster. Dr. Mercer found himself watching her more often than he intended. At first he had dismissed her as an overly cautious nurse. Now he was beginning to notice patterns. Rachel always seemed to arrive at a patient seconds before a problem became obvious. She checked things other people overlooked. She asked questions nobody else thought to ask. More importantly, she was almost always right. In Trauma Bay 4, a teenage patient suddenly became anxious and complained about a headache. The initial scans appeared normal. Several staff members assumed it was stress from the accident. Rachel studied the monitor, then the patient, then the monitor again. Can we repeat the neurological assessment? She asked. The resident assigned to the case hesitated. We already completed one. Rachel nodded. Please do another. The physician looked annoyed but complied. Minutes later, subtle changes appeared that required immediate attention. The resident stared at the new results and slowly looked back toward Rachel. How did you catch that? Rachel simply adjusted a blanket and moved on to the next patient. Across the department, an elderly woman suddenly became confused. Rachel noticed it before anyone else. A businessman recovering comfortably began showing signs of distress that were almost invisible to the untrained eye. Rachel caught that too. One after another, small interventions prevented larger emergencies. The staff began listening whenever she spoke. Not because of her rank. Not because of her authority. Because experience was teaching them that ignoring Rachel Whitmore was becoming a very bad idea. The charge nurse approached Dr. Mercer while reviewing charts. Have you looked at her personnel file? She asked quietly. Briefly, Mercer answered. Emergency nursing experience. Good recommendations. That is all? Mercer frowned. What are you suggesting? The charge nurse lowered her voice. I am suggesting that nobody learns these instincts from ordinary hospital work. Before Mercer could respond, a loud alert sounded from one of the monitoring stations. Several heads turned. Rachel was already moving. She reached the patient before anyone else. Her hands remained calm. Her instructions were clear and precise. Within moments the situation stabilized. Relief swept through the room. A few nurses exchanged amazed looks. One of them whispered, "It is like she has seen all of this before." Rachel pretended not to hear. Yet deep inside, memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit began stirring. Distant sounds. Long nights. Endless responsibility. Faces she had spent years trying to forget. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the present. 12 patients depended on the people inside this hospital tonight. That was all that mattered. Then, as Rachel adjusted the blanket of a recovering patient near the far corner of the department, the man slowly opened his eyes. He studied her face for several seconds. Confusion gave way to recognition. Then disbelief. His expression changed completely. No, he whispered. That cannot be you. Rachel froze for the briefest moment. The patient continued staring at her. Phoenix? He asked softly. And for the first time that night, Rachel looked genuinely unsettled. The room seemed quieter after the word left the patient's mouth. Phoenix. The name hung in the air for only a second, yet it felt much longer. Rachel looked at the man carefully. He appeared to be in his late 50s. His chart identified him as Michael Dawson, a retired contractor traveling through the state when the accident occurred. Nothing about the file explained why he was staring at her as if he had seen a ghost. You have me confused with someone else, Rachel said calmly. Michael slowly shook his head. No. I never forget faces. His voice was weak but certain. Especially not hers. Before Rachel could respond, another nurse called for assistance across the department. She stepped away immediately. Work came first. It always did. Yet several people nearby had heard the exchange. One resident glanced toward Rachel. Another looked at Michael. The charge nurse frowned but said nothing. Dr. Mercer, however, noticed everything. 10 minutes later he found Michael awake and stable. Who is Phoenix? Mercer asked. Michael studied him for a moment. You really do not know? Know what? Michael let out a slow breath. Then maybe she wants it that way. Mercer waited. Years ago, Michael continued, I worked with military logistics overseas. Every now and then stories circulated about people who were never supposed to exist. Operators. Specialists. The kind of people whose names never appeared in newspapers. Mercer crossed his arms. And? Michael looked toward the far end of the emergency department where Rachel was helping a young patient feel comfortable. One of those stories involved someone called Phoenix. Mercer almost laughed. You are telling me the quiet nurse over there is some kind of legend? I am telling you, Michael replied, that I saw her save people when everyone else had already given up. Before Mercer could ask another question, a hospital administrator hurried into the department. Her expression immediately caught his attention. Dr. Mercer, she said. I need you for a moment. Mercer followed her toward the nurse's station. What is it? The administrator lowered her voice. Security just called. Why? 3 black government vehicles arrived outside 5 minutes ago. Mercer frowned. Government vehicles? Yes. What agency? They would not say. Mercer felt a strange uneasiness settle in his chest. Through the front windows he could see silhouettes moving near the entrance. Professional. Disciplined. Waiting. Not rushing. As if they already knew exactly who they had come for. Back inside the emergency department, Rachel continued her work without looking toward the lobby even once. Yet anyone watching closely would have noticed one small change. For the first time all evening, her hands paused over a patient chart. Only for a second. Then she quietly closed the folder and returned to work. Whatever memories the name Phoenix had awakened, they had not disappeared. And somewhere beyond the hospital doors, the past she had spent years avoiding was beginning to move toward her. Outside, the black vehicles remained parked beneath the hospital entrance lights. No sirens. No flashing emergency signals. Just quiet patience. Inside, the emergency department continued operating at full speed. Most of the 12 patients were now stable, and for the first time all evening, staff members could breathe a little easier. Yet a different kind of tension had begun replacing the medical urgency. Questions were spreading faster than answers. Dr. Mercer stood near the nurse's station reviewing updated charts when the hospital administrator returned. Her expression had not improved. They are still waiting, she said. Mercer looked through the glass doors again. Did they ask for someone? No. Did they identify themselves? Only enough to clear security immediately. Mercer frowned. Federal? Higher than that, apparently. Across the department, Rachel moved from room to room checking on each patient. Her routine never changed. She adjusted blankets, reviewed medication schedules, answered family questions, and reassured worried relatives. Anyone watching her would have assumed she was simply an experienced nurse finishing a difficult shift. Yet several employees had begun observing her differently. The stories. The instincts. The name Phoenix. None of it fit the woman they thought they knew. As Rachel entered one recovery room, she found Michael Dawson awake again. His color looked better now. His vital signs were stable. You should be resting, she said. Michael smiled faintly. I spent years hoping I would never see you again. Rachel checked his monitor. That is an unusual thing to say. Not if you understand what it means. Rachel remained silent. Michael studied her carefully. You never told them, did you? Told them what? Who you are. Rachel adjusted the blanket at the foot of his bed. I am a nurse. Michael almost laughed. You were never just a nurse. For several seconds neither spoke. Finally Rachel looked toward the doorway to ensure nobody was nearby. That was a long time ago. Michael nodded slowly. Some people do not forget. Rachel's expression softened slightly. Some people should. Before he could respond, a hospital phone rang near the nurse's station. Moments later the charge nurse hurried toward Dr. Mercer carrying a message slip. Mercer read it once. Then again. His face changed immediately. Are you certain? He asked. The charge nurse nodded. The call came directly from Washington. Nearby staff members exchanged confused looks. Mercer glanced across the department toward Rachel. Then he looked back at the message in his hand. The note contained only a few words. Incoming visitor. Admiral Thomas Kane. Estimated arrival 10 minutes. Mercer felt a chill run through him. He knew exactly who Admiral Kane was. Nearly everyone in military medicine knew the name. Decorated. Respected. Influential. The kind of person who did not travel across the country for routine reasons. The kind of person who certainly did not appear without notice at a regional hospital. Yet according to the message, he was already on his way. And somehow Mercer knew the visit had nothing to do with the accident victims. Across the room, Rachel continued updating patient records, completely unaware that every step she took was bringing her closer to a reunion she had spent years trying to avoid. The news spread through the hospital faster than anyone intended. Nobody announced it publicly, yet whispers traveled from department to department. An admiral was coming. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. Staff members tried to focus on their responsibilities, but curiosity kept pulling their attention back toward the emergency department. Meanwhile, Rachel Whitmore continued working as if nothing unusual was happening. She reviewed medication schedules, checked recovery notes, and made certain every patient from the accident received the attention they needed. To her, the mission had never changed. People needed help. Everything else could wait. Dr. Mercer watched her from across the nurses' station. The more he observed, the more questions appeared. He had spent 20 years in emergency medicine. He had trained residents, supervised trauma teams, and worked through disasters that tested entire hospitals. Yet he had never seen anyone perform quite like Rachel. She never seemed rushed. She never seemed surprised. More importantly, she never appeared to need recognition. Most skilled professionals eventually revealed pride in their accomplishments. Rachel showed none. It was as if she considered extraordinary performance completely normal. A young nurse approached her with concern about a recovering patient. Before the nurse finished explaining, Rachel was already moving toward the room. She entered, spoke calmly with the patient, adjusted one treatment detail, and reassured the family. Within minutes the concern disappeared. The young nurse stared after her. "How does she do that?" she whispered. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. At 8:12 p.m., the automatic doors near the emergency entrance opened. Several hospital employees instinctively looked up. 4 individuals entered first. Their appearance was professional but understated. They did not wear uniforms. They did not identify themselves. Yet the confidence in their movements immediately attracted attention. Security personnel greeted them with unusual respect. Moments later another figure entered behind them. Taller. Older. Calm. The entire atmosphere shifted. Dr. Mercer recognized him instantly from military conferences and medical leadership events. Admiral Thomas Kane. The conversations around the nurses' station stopped almost immediately. Kane's presence carried a quiet authority that required no introduction. He did not look around with curiosity. He looked around like a man searching for someone specific. The administrator hurried forward. "Admiral Kane, welcome to St. Matthew Regional." Kane shook her hand politely. "Thank you." His eyes continued scanning the department. "Where is Rachel Whitmore?" The administrator blinked. Dr. Mercer felt his stomach tighten. So it was true. The Admiral had not come because of the accident. He had come because of Rachel. Several staff members exchanged shocked looks. The administrator pointed toward the far end of the department. Rachel was helping an elderly patient understand discharge instructions. Kane followed the gesture. For a moment he simply stood there. His expression changed in a way nobody expected. Respect. Genuine respect. The kind usually reserved for people of extraordinary importance. Rachel sensed someone watching and finally looked up. The folder in her hands lowered slightly. Across the room, her eyes met the Admiral's. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Yet everyone nearby could feel that this was not the first time they had met. And judging by the look on Rachel's face, the past she had tried to leave behind had finally arrived. For several long seconds, neither Rachel nor Admiral Kane spoke. The emergency department seemed to hold its breath with them. Nurses stopped typing. Residents stopped talking. Even patients who were awake sensed something unusual unfolding in front of them. Rachel was the first to move. She handed the discharge paperwork to the elderly patient, offered a reassuring smile, and finished explaining the medication instructions before turning her attention to the Admiral. The professionalism of the gesture surprised everyone watching. Whatever history existed between them, she was not going to abandon a patient halfway through a conversation. Kane watched quietly until she was finished. Then he took a few steps forward. "Rachel," he said. His voice carried neither rank nor authority. Only familiarity. Rachel met his gaze. "Admiral." The title sounded respectful but distant. Kane nodded slowly. "It has been a long time." "That depends on who is counting." A few staff members exchanged confused looks. This was not how people normally spoke to a man of Kane's status. Yet the Admiral showed no sign of offense. If anything, he seemed to respect her even more. Dr. Mercer approached cautiously. "Admiral Kane, is there something we can help you with?" Kane glanced toward him. "Actually, Doctor, your staff has already done more than enough tonight." His eyes returned to Rachel. Especially her. The room became even quieter. Mercer felt every person nearby leaning in to hear what came next. "I reviewed the reports on my flight here," Kane continued. 12 patients. Multiple complications. No loss of life. Several critical situations recognized before they became emergencies. He paused. "That sounds exactly like you." Rachel looked away for a moment. "People needed help. They always did." Kane smiled faintly. "That was never the remarkable part." Mercer finally spoke. "Admiral, with all due respect, who exactly is Rachel Whitmore?" Kane did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the emergency department around him. The organized treatment areas. The recovering patients. The exhausted staff. Then he looked back at Rachel. "May I?" Rachel remained silent for several seconds. The entire room waited. Finally she gave a small nod. Kane turned toward the staff. "Years ago, there was a specialized medical program attached to several military operations overseas. Its purpose was simple. Put the best medical minds possible where help was least likely to arrive in time." He paused again. Most people involved were never publicly identified. The charge nurse felt her heart pounding. Mercer could barely take his eyes off Rachel. Kane continued. "Among those specialists, one medic earned a reputation that spread farther than any official report. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she sought attention. Because whenever conditions became impossible, she somehow found a way to keep people alive." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Kane looked directly at Rachel and said the words that made the entire department fall silent. They called her Phoenix because no matter how bad the situation became, hope seemed to rise wherever she appeared. The words settled over the emergency department like a wave. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed capable of speaking. Nurses who had worked beside Rachel for weeks stared at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. Residents who had quietly questioned her decisions earlier now replayed every moment of the evening in their minds. Dr. Mercer looked from Admiral Kane to Rachel and back again, trying to reconcile the calm nurse he knew with the person being described. Rachel, however, seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention. She lowered her eyes briefly and adjusted a patient chart resting on the counter beside her. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. Kane nodded. "It was. People move on. Some do." Kane's expression softened. "Others spend years remembering who helped them get home." Across the room, Michael Dawson smiled faintly from his hospital bed. Several other patients were now listening openly. The atmosphere no longer felt like a hospital during a difficult shift. It felt like a room witnessing a truth slowly emerge from the shadows. Dr. Mercer finally stepped forward. If everything he is saying is true, why would you leave all of that behind? Rachel looked at him for a moment before answering. Because eventually the mission ends. Kane gently shook his head. For most people, perhaps. Rachel gave him a look that suggested she disagreed. People needed nurses. So I became one. You were always one, Kane replied. The uniform was never the important part. Silence followed. Then one of the younger nurses spoke before she could stop herself. You mean she has been doing this for years? Kane almost smiled. Longer than most people here realize. He turned toward the 12 patients recovering throughout the department. Tonight was actually a familiar pattern. Several staff members exchanged confused looks. Kane continued. When pressure rises, most people become louder. Rachel becomes quieter. When situations become uncertain, most people hesitate. Rachel starts observing. She notices details others overlook. The charge nurse slowly remembered the entire evening. The subtle warnings. The early interventions. The calm decisions. Suddenly everything made sense. Rachel had not been getting lucky. She had been operating at a level nobody else understood. Mercer exhaled slowly. That is why she kept seeing problems before they happened. Exactly, Kane answered. Because she learned long ago that the smallest details often matter the most. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Admiral. Kane looked at her. Yes? You did not fly across the country just to embarrass me. A few people laughed nervously. Kane's smile faded. No. I did not. The change in his tone immediately caught everyone's attention. The room grew quiet again. Kane reached inside a leather portfolio he had been carrying since he arrived. From it, he removed a sealed folder marked with several official insignias. He held it for a moment before looking directly at Rachel. I came because something happened 3 days ago. Rachel's expression changed. Not fear. Not panic. Recognition. As if she already suspected what was coming next. Kane placed the folder gently on the counter between them. And after reviewing the reports, he said, there was only one person I trusted enough to ask for help. Nobody moved. The sealed folder sat on the counter between Admiral Kane and Rachel Whitmore like a bridge connecting two completely different lives. Around them, the emergency department remained quiet. The crisis that had consumed the evening was finally ending. The 12 patients who had arrived within minutes of one another were stable. Families were receiving updates. Nurses were catching their breath. And yet every person in the room seemed focused on a single question. What could possibly bring an admiral across the country to ask a hospital nurse for help? Rachel looked at the folder but did not touch it. I retired from that world a long time ago, she said. Kane nodded. I know. Then you already know my answer. Normally, yes. His voice remained calm. But this situation is different. Rachel studied him carefully. During all the years she had known Thomas Kane, she had rarely seen concern in his eyes. Tonight she saw it clearly. That alone told her more than the folder ever could. What happened? She asked quietly. Kane exhaled. 3 days ago, a medical team disappeared during a humanitarian operation overseas. No conflict. No disaster. Just a routine mission. Communication was lost. Several people nearby exchanged nervous glances. Kane continued. The team included doctors, nurses, logistics specialists, and civilians. Good people. Experienced people. Rachel listened without interrupting. Every agency involved has reviewed the situation, Kane said. Every expert has offered recommendations. And? Rachel asked. Kane gave a faint smile. None of them think the way you do. Silence followed. Rachel finally picked up the folder. She did not open it. She simply held it in her hands for several seconds. Across the department, Dr. Mercer watched closely. For the first time since meeting Rachel, he understood something important. Her greatest strength was never the training. It was never the reputation. It was never the stories. It was the weight she carried quietly without ever asking anyone to notice. Rachel looked around the emergency department one final time. 12 patients. 12 families. 12 chances that could have ended differently. Then she looked back at Kane. I am not Phoenix anymore. Kane's expression softened. Maybe not. He glanced toward the recovering patients. But what I saw tonight reminded me of something. Rachel raised an eyebrow. What is that? Kane smiled. Some people do not stop being who they are. They simply choose different places to serve. For the first time all evening, Rachel laughed softly. Not because the situation was funny. Because she knew he was right. The charge nurse suddenly spoke up from across the room. For what it is worth, she said, I am glad you were here tonight. Others nodded. Dr. Mercer stepped forward. So am I. Rachel looked at the people around her and realized something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not because her past had disappeared. Not because it had been forgotten. But because she no longer needed to hide from it. She set the folder beneath her arm and looked toward the patients one last time. Make sure they all get home safely, she said. Then she turned toward the exit beside Admiral Kane. And as the doors opened, every person watching understood the same lesson. Respect is never earned through titles, uniforms, or recognition. It is earned in silence, one life at a time.